I'm Elian, and I'm once again experimenting with microalgae. Let's recap some of the things that algae need to grow. Now, I've got my algae tank right here, and in this tank, there are basically four important things. There is light, which is supplied with LEDs surrounding the tank. There is water, which is inside the tank, and that water has nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus that the algae need to grow. And on top of all that, there's air, specifically carbon dioxide in the air that the algae use to grow. Now that's everything the algae need to survive from the process of photosynthesis, along with some additional nutrients that they get in the water. Now on this vlog, I have talked about three of those things. I've talked about light a lot. In fact, I did that last week. I've talked about nutrients and water. That was basically my entire nitrate and phosphate experiment. But what I haven't talked about a lot is air, or carbon dioxide. Air, and specifically the carbon dioxide contained in the air, is probably the second most important thing that algae need after light. And that's because carbon dioxide is super important for photosynthesis. Photosynthesis, like I mentioned last time, is the process that algae use to turn sunlight into sugar, which is energy that algae can use. Now, I did mention that process was a little bit simplified because I was focusing on the light part. But actually, the process of photosynthesis is where sunlight is used as energy to take a bunch of reactants and turn them into sugar. Now, I didn't talk about those reactants before, but one of the really important reactants in this process is carbon dioxide. So, in essence, if the algae don't have enough carbon dioxide, or don't have enough air in general, they're not able to perform photosynthesis, and that means that they're not able to grow. Now, the reason I haven't talked about air as much is because honestly, it's pretty simple to set up. All I did when I built my first bioreactor was hook up an aquarium bubbler to the tank, put a tube inside, and from that point on, the algae had enough air to survive. And I didn't really think much about the air supplying process up until now. But just this past week, I was wondering, how do these aquarium bubblers actually work? Now, this is the bubbler in question. You can see it's got a power cord that I just plug into the wall, and I can attach a tube here into either of these valves. And somehow, in this literal black box, air is able to come out of the tube and get supplied to the algae. And really, I was trying to figure out, why does that work? So I did what I did best and decided to take this thing apart. So, I have removed the outer casing of the aquarium bubbler. There were just some screws holding it together that I was able to take out with this trusty screwdriver. And when I open this up, what you can see inside is a pretty simple looking setup. And I wasn't exactly sure how this worked to begin with. But I did some testing out some stuff, and after plugging this into the wall, what I realized is that this blue thing over here is an electromagnet. And this thing over here has another magnet that is attracted to this electromagnet that causes this whole thing to vibrate. Now, you can see what I'm talking about if I actually plug the bubbler in, which I've done. You can see that, first of all, it's making a sound, and if I feel here, this little bit here is actually vibrating. And that's a result of this electromagnet over here, which is what actually gets the power from the wall. Now, the way this works is actually kind of like a pair of bellows, which are these ancient devices that were used to stimulate fires by blowing air on them. Now, the way bellows work is essentially they just take the air, compress it, and push it out a stream. And that's essentially what this thing does. It takes an air from the bottom into this little area here, and then the vibration of this piece here pushes the air out through these valves. And that's what gets it through the tube and into the algae. Now, the bubbler does offer you the ability to control the power of the airstream, and that's done by turning this knob on the back. So, as you can see, as I turn it up, the vibration gets louder, and maybe you can even see it vibrating a little better here. Essentially what it's doing is just increasing power to the electromagnet so that the magnets vibrate faster and ultimately more air is pushed out at a time. But there is another thing that would change how much power this bubbler has. Right now, the electromagnet is a fixed distance away from the vibrating bit, right? It has about this much space between the magnet and the vibrator. But if I were to take this magnet out and pull it farther away, then the magnet wouldn't be as attracted to it, and it would vibrate less, right? And that is exactly what I tested out over here. So I built this little machine with the best building tool out there, Lego. And essentially what I've done is I've taken out the vibrating bit over here, the electromagnet over here, and I've moved it a distance away from the vibrating thing. Now, what this little machine does is it allows me to control the distance from the vibrator that the electromagnet is. So if I move it forward, the electromagnet gets closer to the vibrator and it should vibrate faster. And if I plug this into the wall, you can see how that will happen. So I have plugged in my bubbler apparatus and I've connected a tube into this cup of water so that you can see what happens when the air bubbles start coming out. Now, you'll notice that there are no air bubbles coming out right now because the electromagnet is too far away from the magnet to cause it to vibrate. But if I push this forward, you'll be able to see that bubbles will start coming out. There they are. And if I push it all the way forward, I hit the maximum level of bubbling, but I can also pull it back a little bit. And I can cause minimal bubbling to happen if I adjust it slightly. So much less bubbling is happening now. Pull it slowly farther and farther away to decrease the rate at which there are bubbles. So that's what I spent most of this week doing, figuring out how this air bubble actually works. And I figured out you can control it not just with the dial on the back, but by actually moving the electromagnet closer or farther from the vibrator. Now it's useful for one specific reason, and that's if I want to make the airflow super, super low. Because the dial only goes so far on the air bubble regularly. So if I want to have a really, really small airflow, very low air, then I need to set up my own contraption like I did to make sure that the airflow stays low. Now, at this point, you might be asking, why is it so good that he's able to have less air? Shouldn't there be more air in the algae? Wouldn't that be a lot better? And you're right, except I'm toying with another idea of setting up a CO2 tank, a carbon dioxide tank, expressly for my algae. Because here's the thing, our regular air, the air in our atmosphere, contains very, very little carbon dioxide. Only about 0.04% of our air is actually carbon dioxide. And while algae can survive in such low carbon dioxide environments, and they grow pretty well, they grow a lot better when there's more carbon dioxide in the air. And we can achieve that by supplying them with more carbon dioxide in the form of carbon dioxide tanks. So I've been thinking about setting up a carbon dioxide tank for these algae. But before I could do that, I needed to figure out how I could control the pressure of the air in from my bubblers, so that I'd be able to appropriately pressurize and control the amount of carbon dioxide going in. So that was kind of the first stage of this project, and hopefully in future vlogs I'll be able to show how it goes in the future. Now, that's all I got for this week. I will make a quick side note about the bioreactor experiment I started last week. Turns out the algae need a little longer to grow, that's why I've been experimenting with the air pump this week. But rest assured, the algae are growing, they're growing under red light this time, which is pretty interesting. I've been seeing some pretty cool results, and I'll share all of the results in the next vlog. So if you're excited to see more of these projects, whether it be red lights for algae, or carbon dioxide, or anything else, make sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow on LinkedIn, and I will see you in the next one.